welcome to part 2. My name is still Philip Bandholtz. I am a trained systemic coach and the host of the Club of Fathers podcast. How exactly does such a constellation on the system board work? You will receive a PDF with the template for this video course. There are a total of 8 steps that you need to go through when you perform such a constellation. And now I will explain these 8 steps to you one by one. Step number 1 is the preliminary discussion. And here we ask 3 questions. The first of these questions is, what is your topic? And here we let the client speak first. We want to find out as much as possible about his family or the organization for which he wants to do the constellation. We do ask questions occasionally. Naturally, we attempt to guide the conversation in a relevant way. And here we are already attempting to determine the identities of the key individuals in the system that we are presently discussing. Who are the most important ones? Because we always work in a minimalist way, but we will discuss this in detail shortly. The second question is, what is your goal? So what do you want to achieve now with this constellation here? As a coach, it's crucial for us to focus on a specific goal, and the client can later confirm that we've definitely achieved that particular goal. The third question is simply, would you like to work on this topic with me together, yes or no? And if the answer is affirmative, then we proceed to step 2, which involves formulating a question to the system. The client does this, and we help him if he's unable to do it. It's important that the question is solution-oriented, resource-oriented, and doesn't focus too much on the negative. The question to the system almost always starts with something like, how can I? Or how do I manage it? So, as previously mentioned, it is about the goal. How can I regain respect within my family? How can I manage to find my place within the system? How can I manage to find myself? How can I manage to demonstrate to my boss that I am valuable? How can I ensure that love flows again? How can I make sure that my colleagues finally take me seriously and treat me professionally? How can I ensure I get value within the system? These are examples of how questions can look. As mentioned, it is important that they are solution-oriented. So, what would be a bad question to the system is, for example, why do I feel so bad? Or why is it that nobody respects me at work? Then we shift our attention to the fact that someone is not being respected by others. So we focus on the person's pain, which doesn't bring them anything at all. Then they leave the coaching session and just feel the pain they already have, even more intensified. And this does not lead to a solution for this person's problem. That means we always focus on the goal. It is logical and practical for you to already sketch the relevant system members on a piece of paper in a kind of diagram. But this is only for you. The client shouldn't see this, as it could influence how they later position the figures. But in order for you to know which figures you must not forget, let's proceed to step 3. Here the client currently chooses the relevant figures. And it is really nice that we have such a large portfolio of figures at this location, which also come in various colors. I believe you will associate something directly with these 2 here, for example. Which of the 2, for instance, is your father? Which of the 2 is your ex-partner? It makes a difference whether you choose the black or the white figure here. But more on that later. The client selects the relevant figures. I will now give an example of a family constellation and an example of an organizational constellation, so that you can also follow along with an example. For example, the client places his wife on the board and lift the child up. In terms of the organizational aspect, there is a possibility that he places the boss, himself, a direct supervisor, and the receptionist in their respective positions, taking into account their roles and responsibilities within the company structure. For example, the figures are initially placed at the edge, and now I'm going to do both constellations simultaneously. You would only do an organizational constellation or a family constellation. They involve different issues, different questions. It is important to note here again that we practice minimalist constellation. This means that we only include the people relevant to the question, to the system. If there is still an uncle present at this moment, we do not necessarily require his presence. We can always bring in individuals later if we realize, hey, we require your father now because he is actually crucial here. Or we need your mother-in-law because she's the one who made sure that your wife is behaving this way now. That has to be included now, but we can do all of that later. That's why we're starting off minimally for now, so we don't overwhelm the client and so the system doesn't become too complex, allowing us to focus on the important processes that will follow shortly. And once we have that, we move on to step number 4. Here, the client collectively arranges the figures. Let's start with the family system. Here, the client could, for example, position himself, his wife, and his child. And you can already see that this is almost a bit of a cliche, an ideal, typical situation. By the way, what I really like about this board is that now we can even, if we want to make it even more cliched, create a divide in the family system here. And that is also a nice process to put together afterwards, but we will discuss the individual processes at a later time. So now the client sets up his family system like this. Let's take a look at the organizational system. I've separated this a bit here so that we can see it well, because I've decided to do this simultaneously now. For example, the client could now set up an organizational system like this. It's also nice to see that all the figures have eyes, except for, as I said, these, let's call them objects, because the direction of the gaze is naturally very important. Here we can see that the boss is looking in that direction, and so is the immediate supervisor, and the receptionist observes our client. We will proceed in this manner, allowing the client to engage in their constellation until it feels appropriate for them. And here it's important that we bring the question to the system to the forefront. In order for the client to find the constellation that feels right for him, we should first focus again on what the question to the system is. Because when I think of my last birthday, which may have been wonderful, then I will have a different constellation afterwards than if I think of my focus, the issue that actually matters to me, or even better, the solution. And that is why the question to the system has been formulated this way. So we say to the client, with your question to the system, how love can flow again, or how you can regain respect in your work environment, how would you now position these figures that you have placed on the sidelines? What feels good to you? Feel free to place them anywhere on this board, however the situation feels to you right now. As I mentioned, the focus is on the client's gut feeling. He's adjusting things a bit here and reevaluating a figure once more. And maybe he exchanges a figure again. That's fine. And at some point, the client says, okay, this feels right now. And sometimes the clients are a bit unsure and confused, but experience shows that once they say, this feels good, then we can work with that very well, because there's something that has intuitively clicked with the clients. We currently have a situation that is extremely positive. We have successfully brought the client's unconsciousness to the surface and into their consciousness, because we trusted our gut feeling. We looked at what the client feels and what he feels. That's what's written here now. And then you quickly notice the power of this method. Now we provide the client with an additional time period, step 5. So we allow the system to work. Then we say, all right, now take another look at it calmly and let it sink in a bit, or attempt to put yourself into the system. Feel it again, sense it again, focus on the system you have established here now. And then we ask our first question, what do you notice? And here the client will usually immediately mention some things. For example, I noticed that I am the smallest in the professional system, and that this receptionist here, like a red dragon, is standing in front of me, staring at me, and the boss and my direct supervisor, they don't care at all about this situation. They don't see the whole picture. They look away. They only care about themselves. They look in a completely different direction, and I'm here almost in my own battle. I have to look up here. When we talk about the family system, the situation, I believe, is also relatively clear and easy to understand. I notice that I am shorter than my wife, even though I am actually taller, and that my wife and daughter are standing close to each other. Also, there's this gap in the middle here that separates us, and I notice both of them are looking at me somehow expectantly. Now, the client has already begun discussing his feelings, but we'll slow him down for now, because our next step is, after he's mentioned what he notices, we inquire, what do you think? How does person XY feel at this moment? And we start here with the other figures. And lastly, we always ask, what do you think? How does the client feel? What do you think? How do you feel in the system right now? Or how do you feel in the system now? Because the opinions of others naturally influence the client's feelings and perceptions. And it's important that he hears it first. How do we proceed here? We always follow the hierarchy from top to bottom. In the family, this hierarchy is shaped and caused by age. It can also happen that in the backstory, we hear that the child is incredibly dominant in the family, and the parents have no idea how to ensure that the child is doing well. The child is at the top of the hierarchy. We can ask, how is the child feeling? What do you think? But playing it safe means we ask why at every level of the hierarchy. Why are we doing this? The boss or the person at the top of the hierarchy speaks first because they typically have the most significant opinion for the client due to their position of authority. And this viewpoint should be expressed initially without being affected by the remaining characters. So let's go one by one. What do you think? How does your wife feel here? There is talking. What do you think? How does your child feel now hearing this? Let's continue the conversation. Now, how do you feel here? And already things will be clear to the client that were unclear before. Of course, we do the same in the organization. How does your boss feel? And that alone is powerful because the client here only has the perspective on their problem and they don't even see me. And now he looks for the first time. What does the boss want? What does my supervisor want? What's it about? For instance, it could turn out that the boss here feels a bit isolated and actually doesn't really know what's happening in his company and that he doesn't like the discomfort it brings. In this manner, the client acquires a distinct viewpoint on the system. Once that has occurred, subsequent to our thorough examination of everyone's emotions, we can additionally conduct a second round, since the boss is now aware of the client's sentiments. And then we can say, what do you think? How does the boss feel now that he has heard this? We can, of course, do the same in the family system. And ultimately, when that occurs, we reiterate, you are aware of what I observe, you know? Perhaps you have been feeling the need all this time to express yourself, to say what you noticed during the constellation of your client. But it is important to always remember that the spotlight is on the client. Whether we are a coach, a consultant, or in whatever role we are conducting this session, we are not helping the client solve their problem, but rather the client solves their problem themselves and deserves the full applause and respect in the end. To have his problem solved, we are actually here just to help take a different perspective on the situation. This is significant. The focus is on the client. What does the client perceive? However, if we believe that he has missed something significant, now is the moment to express, you know what I observe? Or may I say what my feeling is about this image right now? And then one can comment on something that the client has overlooked. However, we should only proceed with this action if the things in question are truly important, indicating that they are crucial for the specific question we had in order to achieve our goal, and should not be disregarded. Sometimes these can be situations, for example, that the client doesn't really want to confront. This may naturally lead to a certain conversation and a little discussion about what we see here and what stands out. And at some point, an impulse arises, or maybe it has been there for a while, to make a change based on this conversation. And now, at step 6, it is also time for the client to make a change in the system, just one. Not many at once, as that confuses everyone again. And then let's do it. Let's stick with the example. The client carries out this task, or the father makes his way to his relative's place of residence. Next, let's ask again, how does your wife feel now with this change? How does the boss feel now with this change? This alteration. How do the remaining system members feel? How does that feel? And then we inquire what needs to be accomplished. This question is of utmost importance to ensure the successful implementation of this crucial change. What needs to take place in the physical world for you to make a move from your current position to the desired destination? And then the client says, I just need to assert myself with the receptionist. Then we realize, okay, we have a conflict here, we have a hurdle here, we have a problem here where the client is struggling to assert oneself against the receptionist and be allowed to see the boss. Or the client is afraid of the boss, or something similar. By the way, this is a really great topic for the problem constellation that we will cover in the third part. But for now, let's continue here. We've made this adjustment now, and now let's talk about it again. Q1. How does XY feel? How do you feel? What do you notice? And then I can tell you again what I notice, what feeling I have now. A small side note at this juncture. I have currently established these two scenarios. The man confronting his spouse and the employer and the customer confronting one another. In situations with rearrangement and two people facing each other, always the case in such constellations, we know there is something to clarify. Sometimes, even in the initial setup, two people are positioned opposite each other. So we know there's something to resolve here. There is a need for discussion here, and we let the clients lead these conversations. For instance, we ask, what would you like to tell your wife? If it's difficult, then we can ask, how do you feel? Then he expresses his feelings. We suggest he communicate with his wife. He needs to consider her perspective, express he feels abandoned. I feel abandoned by you and the little one. I feel like I'm not part of the family. And then we turn it around and say, now put yourself in the woman's shoes. Try to view the system from her perspective. How does that feel for her? What is she saying to you at this moment? And from these conversations, the crucial situations come out and emerge, revealing the significance of the discussions and their impact on the overall outcome. And once this conversation is clarified, then a new impulse generally tends to arise in order to readjust. Yes, we have clarified that now, so we can also stand like this. By the way, the client doesn't necessarily have to be present during these discussions. It may also happen that the client realizes that the boss and supervisor have something to discuss, and we can also lead these conversations. You're now the supervisor. What would you like to say? You're now the boss. What would you like to respond? We then have these convos, and something comes out of it. And from these convos, when what is happening between the two is resolved, there's usually a direct impulse to rearrange something in the system. And now we will proceed step by step until the client has an image of the solution and explicitly states that there is nothing more to add. That's good. It feels good. And now I'll give you a few classic examples of what such a solution image looks like. In the family system, the classic scenario would be that the father and mother need to talk to each other. Child stands here in middle. From child's viewpoint, this doesn't feel good. That will come out. So the child just steps aside, and mother and father need to talk. Then there's an important process we go through, which is exchanging the figure. And here again, you see an advantage of the system board. We have the same figure again, but in a larger size, and can exchange ideas here. And now you notice the father, the mother also become a real counterpart. This probably corresponds much more to the body size. So in normal cases, we exchange the figure here and then continue to set up the family until they eventually all face in the direction of the child. And this is the customary solution image that is often associated with a typical family situation. Everyone is looking in the same direction. The child is in the front, protected by the mother and father. They stand close together, with the man usually standing on the right. Strictly speaking, the figure on the right is always the one that is highest in the hierarchy. And in the family, usually it's the man. And here, I've often had discussions with clients or even with female clients who look at this from a feminist perspective and say, wait a minute, why is the man higher up in the hierarchy? The response is, I am unsure. However, in most cases, it just feels better. That's the general consensus. Occasionally, individuals, the clients, also set it up like that, and my approach in such situations is to give it a try. Can I do this? And then I turn it around. And so far, it has always felt better. For a specific reason, in a particular way. I cannot explain it. That is how I acquired knowledge of it. Hence, this is a clue for you. Usually, the eldest in the hierarchy is at the top, typically the man, if this explanation suffices for you. So if a man marries a woman who is 10 years older than him, it can actually be the other way around sometimes. Just as a note for you. But what's interesting is that everyone is looking in one direction, towards a common future. It does not mean that the solution image at the end has to be exactly like that. However, it is always worth it if the client has a solution image to try out and really give the hint, can I try something? For instance, if the solution image is that the three stand here and gaze at one another, for example, a possible issue here could be that the child holds too high of a position in the man's hierarchy, who is our client, and he is unable to lead properly here and is unable to live up to his responsibility as an adult with life experience. So we can try out, how does that feel for you when we turn the child around now and you two get closer together again? Why is there still so much distance between men and women? Move closer together. How does that feel? And then the client either says good or he says, oh no, that's way too close. Then we have another topic. That's why we have this example image. Let's go to the image of our organizational constellation. Here, I have substituted the client with an individual who is on an equal footing with the others. And as I mentioned, I do not only do this in the constellation, but the client will eventually experience this impulse independently, or I will eventually bring it to their attention and suggest exchanging you for a figure that has the identical size. How does that feel? Here we see a hierarchy again. The boss is on the right, then the supervisor, the employee, and the receptionist. I am assuming here that our client is a regular employee. If he is just an intern, then the whole thing would of course look like this. And everyone looks towards a shared future. The hierarchy is clear, everyone has their place. This is what our solution picture looks like, for example. This entire process is step number 7, the detailed development of the system leading up to the solution picture, as illustrated here. The client is welcome to take a picture of it, as it can make sense for him to have a visual reference and look at it again at a later time. And we then come to the final step in our constellation regarding the eco questions. The eco check simply consists of a few questions. So, does this feel right to you at this moment? Is that all? Have we truly considered everything? Are there any remaining inconsistencies? Do you still have a bad feeling about the matter? Do you feel the need to rearrange something again? These are just the questions we ask again at the end to make sure that everything has really worked. And we can also work with the so-called future pacing. This is a method from NLP where we say something like, what are you going to do in the next 48 hours to commence this development? What are the initial steps you need to undertake in order to bring this image into reality and embark on your journey towards its manifestation? What needs to be done? What's next? And then you'll realize the client has gained greatly for themselves. He has gained clarity about the situation. He has seen the system. He has taken on the perspectives of others. And he has also realized where he really wants to go with the system. And these solution images that we have, they are actually emotions. These are interpersonal emotions that we want to evoke, which the client subsequently needs to evoke in response. And he has specific steps at hand that he can take now to improve his situation. He'll be very grateful to you for that. And all this with such a small tool that fits in any backpack, which you can always have with you. I believe it is simply fantastic. However, there are also circumstances where you should not necessarily establish the system, but rather a totally different system. For instance, if the client expresses, I desire to regain self-love. How should we proceed in that situation? You will discover the answer in the 3rd section of our course.